요게 제르메치기 안에 템바 상기 점된 대기 구송 도숨기 연대다 안도시네 년 템베도네 안에 상기 점된 대리야 안에 지게 령아 26년에 저밖에 전부 표아레스 안디 표야디야 안에 가르치도 표아레스는 소수교련인데 개와디 요관에부터 표하다 마개와디 안에 가서로 개위 체도 저 개침 표아레스 되네시 제름지도 나와레스 지난 디네 자다 안주이네 안디기 추안주기 디 제름지 나와 나신지 안주이네 냠렌체데 가르람나다 어데 상예기 고송도 유인데 셈네데 델리아네 데베게다는 구바치야 안델리아 소소라랑기 강토도 지션리아 가서 최고 부야다 아니 지기 차자와라 소바 기주주야디 어베지 지화디 기침무제야세데 당아주 지화야 당아주 지화념네 지화디 지야레스도 도슈 뒤쇼게드네 슈로앙.
Good afternoon. This morning, when we started to look at the text, looking at the first verse, we saw that in this first verse, the author of our text, Lama Tsongkhapa, he generated deep respect and reverence for Buddha Shakyamuni. And the way that he did so would be through recalling his many good qualities of his physical behavior, his speech, and his mind. And with this mind of deep and abiding trust and faith that had arisen, he then expressed his veneration respectfully by committing to continue to strive in cultivating the qualities of the Buddha. In other words, the qualities expressed through the teachings. He committed to striving to develop them in his own mind. And moreover, this morning I mentioned that the way that we should relate to each of these verses, and in fact every teaching that one receives, is not as if this is just a mere story or an historical account of a great being, but rather we should take this as personal advice that has been written and presented now for us to emulate, for us to live in accordance with. So this is the way to relate here to this verse and the subsequent verses. So what we looked at here is that we should too commit to striving to cultivating the minds of the Buddha within.
Then ngazidiri shokeshi tsiktambo khoranda delaya chada yungi tuyense negaplia ngazui digituya ta ani tingi digituya sadi ma shurwa zede bizunzon shubena ta chado se negapsadi ngazui anzlia semlia konro sa che semmaji warchi chado de kabla ngazui kudu khoranya 직 우디방 직파 제 우파 직파 숙체스 수태 마 줄레제 되네 도스는 relation 된 삼샤다 가야 삼마다제 우디파 직 답파다야다 수태니 되랑 삼다제 될 우중업 진도스 공부이나 되네 셈디파 우다파로서 삼바다다 수용서 선배도 신은 지 될야까지 두주년에 되어버리는 제가 셈디 될야 제주니도 대지 공로제 셈디 차상 시주제 소소를 해야지 내가 그도라야 되네게 삼다면은 거기서 그 지난주에 셈 공로사다 셈 맞기 바로지 되시려면 되네게 그도라야 시투야게 배천로세다 직상얘기 되네게 남편 손시아바디 가서 냠는 제바이나 그도라야 소소게 셈디 뒤шлö시 차투야데 용거와 랑라 삼다면 아 현지에 삼다는 소소를 야치들의 부로보다 소소게 지게 남미로 미사질 삼다면 지 코로나다 콘즈베지 마기버려 요나 소소게 될야 지게 잠제 콘줄에 잠제 삼다 닝지에 것도 강한 체셔서 콘줄 강하게 세고 선비 코로에 잠제 삼다지 아니 지게 지 기시셔야돼 님보 기시하고 셔야다 아니 콘줄이야 지 코로나도 님보 거야다 되네 강을 두시네 판도 제바이나 은 파주메 셈디에 강아지 마기웨디에 마시체는 흘려차도바디 지상은 내가 그렇게 되네기 그도라 총중으로 충자섬다면에 되네기 아는가 저기 랑기 셈 흘려차도야다 현이 셈 마기웨디 흘려차도야디 되네기 배선로지 정도와.
Also this morning in the first line it's mentioned short and long-term benefits. I spoke this morning about how we all want to experience happiness. And what we yearn for is long-term happiness, happiness that is lasting and sustained. But short-term happiness is also required. So to give some illustrations from the teachings of the Buddha, that when one either notices a physical change in one's body, for example, a change in the way one is breathing, or notices that anger, for example, is present in one's mind, then that's an opportunity immediately to try and step back, calm our mind, calm our breath. As our breath starts to calm, so too will our mind be calming, our anger will be reducing. And then, just through a very simple technique of calming the mind through following the breath, the anger will subside and our temporary unhappiness will be reduced and replaced rather by temporary happiness. And similarly, when those that we are around, in particular it's easiest with those that we are close to, such as our loved ones, when they are unhappy, for example, whether it's your child or your partner, and they are unhappy, maybe they are angry, recognize that they are in pain, recognize that they are suffering, and in this way allow your heart to open towards them. And as you allow compassion to arise within you towards them, you can talk to them, interact with them in a manner that is gentle and tender. And in this way, by emotionally embracing them, their anger will subside. So in this way, one can temporarily reduce one's own suffering as well as the suffering of others.
that delia and sala mi dewa kebaina that jeke benjo da dinige kanga chebina ya jeke wonbo ma samba la so ba de benjo kanga chebina kanga ji yongoro mili kebina ina de de le nga jeke chedelia lunga ni je de chudumson di chudumson de kewachi lada mi ko wa toya gyu dene che den delia so so gi ji xian lia na guncho le chuo phe de xian lia pen bi gi jinba jinbi ru du she de dang bai na de nang de kewachi and the socially tingy you. And then and said Delia, Sosarangi, Sevocombala Sobachevana, and Sosara Gewachima, the Ombo Sawala Sopa, the Sosugi, and the Sisida Tempoyaki, Chagorches, and the Nigi, some do Chevina, Tesukewachima, then as you can have a Miko want to your Dendelia, Diki to your Gutiri, as a chance of Basin Roshi that do say.
Moreover, one can also with ease cultivate the causes that will lead to longer-term happiness, such as a further good rebirth, rebirths in the high realms as a human or God. So the primary cause for good rebirth, such as we have attained and we need to attain in lives to come, is ethical restraint. For example, the determination not to take life, not to kill. So by cultivating an ethical outlook and living an ethical life, one generates the causes that will lead to a good rebirth. And to ensure that that good rebirth as a human or God is marked with an abundance of material goods, one needs to practice generosity. And generosity can be directed in two general directions. One is towards the three jewels, and the second is towards suffering beings, so helping others in need. In this way, one engages in the practice of generosity. And a third key component is the practice of patience, where keeping one's mind subdued in the face of adversity, where one's mind stays undisturbed in the face of adversity. And in this way, one creates further good causes for our rebirths in future lives. So through this and other ways, one can now, with relative ease, accumulate the causes that will lead to good rebirths in lives to come.
this one is Yamlinje, the Yamlinje student, some knowledge, some dialogue, just some that in the Tangi Luma Yusum Yukana, Shanla, Nebat, and Shanla, Tsivich, I was talking to Jimia, Sampi, some Lodi, Digat Yane, Yando Tane, Dita, the Kichimbura, Dita, and Nazuki Sutum so as you were. That in it, and in it, so to get Shahalia and Chictus in it. Roger that is a checker. The Angele to sing on some non to some of the Distango, they said Tanganzuki, Gara Dinama, Karasungor, and Chisa, and to some Dana, the Dinestangore said, Love Jacko, but Chisada some do so Tangore said, Manzu do Chen, the Jandor Chawar, and the Dinazada, some do Stangore, says Did Tangazu Shogesha together, and Yam Labja send us so Suki Yamlenja to see what I said.
This text is about how to gain experience or how to practice. So it's the same word, that how to practice or how to gain experience. And what this refers to is transforming our way of thinking. So what needs to be understood is that the meaning of Buddhist practice means to transform our way of thinking. So for example, the fundamental cause that leads to a good rebirth is ethical restraint. And an illustration is not to kill. So merely not killing is insufficient. We need to have the determination not to kill. And with such a determination, we refrain from killing. So therefore, the practice of not killing, for example, is training our mind to develop a deep aversion to taking the life of another, or even bringing harm to another. So training our mind in this way is the training of ethics. And this is Buddhist practice, training our mind. So this morning it was also mentioned that the Buddha and the teachers, the way they can protect us, the way they can help us, is by guiding, by teaching. But it is for us then to train our mind to take the teachings we receive and put them into practice, to make them a very part of our being. And the way we do that is through training our mind.
Yeah, that in my share that they sing to Jermichelia, Sonro Che, says to Sine, Shuhendi, Digor, they show some quarter Jermichida.
We'll continue with the text, and now we come to some verses where the request for teachings by the student, Namkapel, is expressed or referenced.
That's it. Lurje session, David Zawate, Dongla Lagyang, Tela Jugurupa, Namka Baji, Rinne Jingbai, Ti Tsiduen Sashin, Yambinga.
The second verse. With luminous intelligence and a stable root of faith, with hands outstretched to offer in order to engage in hearing, Namkapel sent from a distant place a letter of meaningful, wholesome, and pleasant words.
Then my Lord session, David Zawate, Lord session said on the Ripasi or Ripologity, that session said Sawa Sidu, and the Chilani, that teaching a or the Dijanada, Mazuki, teaching on the Samnon Alia, some the division at Deepa Chagor, and the Mazurasha, Niga Dunga, Yuchagore, Dijabana, and the Kawari, Dijabana, Digitebo, and the Chike, Digungore said, Tenigi, Yautugi, Yawa. Number chasing Gita, Ribat Yahu Yavas or the Lord session say.
Luminous intelligence, then, or clear intelligence, refers to the knowing clearly what should be adopted and what should be abandoned. In other words, what is virtuous and should be adopted, and what is non-virtuous and what should be abandoned. So having such intelligence, where one can easily differentiate between what to engage in, what way of thinking is wholesome and virtuous, and what ways of thinking are harmful and to be abandoned.
Is that the Namgapa said, Kurong, that the niche do, said the Kurong Kishiru, so I think Kurong the niche do, said the session. Then David Zawatian said the Nikurong and the Sanyeda, Chelia, Debata, Yishi Timbuyoba, and the chicken, and do Sresha session.
Lama Tsongkhapa here is acknowledging that the student who requested these teachings, Namkapel, he has this quality of luminous intelligence, and moreover, he has stable faith in the teachings of the Buddha, in the Buddha Dharma.
Lu long jue da an de xian ge shang gi ni xing bi yuan den de ge xian li dong hai ge san ba dang zhe dong yue san ba de ne ge san ba yue ba an la jian se jin ba dong wa lai go jin ba dong wa lai la jian se de jin ba dang wa jiang rong ge du xian ne du dang go res ji san ji jiao rang le jin ba dang de ge dong ya ge san ba yue ba an de san ba yue ma xian de xian li de ne ge an ji ge jin ba dang wa la so ba an ji ge du xian da an ji dong la jiang an te la ju ju ba se de ne Nyamlen Jege, Sanji, the Lama Sanji, Sumbi Chelia, Sosuke Tebache, Tebe Dundelia, and the Yanu, some then Sambi Dundelia, and the Juk said the Gumba, Gumgo, restaurant to Nyamlen Chiver, Yaburesha says to some more.
The second line, with hands outstretched to offer. So this, Lama Tsongkhapa is praising his generous attitude, his Namkapel's wish to give of himself so as to both spiritually develop but also to ease the suffering burden of others. So Namkapel is being praised here for his intelligence, for his faith, and for his generous attitude. And in order to engage in hearing, so this term hearing is also can be translated as study. So it's the wish to understand the Buddha Dharma and engage. This term refers to the cultivation, to engage in the teachings. In other words, to meditate on them, to habituate one's way of thinking so that the teachings haven't merely been studied, but they are integrated into one's very being, one's very way of thinking. So Namkapel is also being praised here then for his being learned, having an interest in the Dharma, as well as for his wish to meditate and his already the efforts he's made in meditating on the Dharma.
Gyurangge Lagi number Cheba, Lodi Ribu Yabu Yoba, and the Sanye Chel, Sanje, Lama, Sanje, Deva, Dembu Yoba, and Gyurangge, Yamlen, Sosugi, Tubig, Sanji, son the Tebache, Tubi, Dundela, some, then some be doing the Gomtine, Yaburesha, Jizan Gyurangge, Shingodida, then the Pa, Shalia, Loptenche, the Jimbatan, about Dongla Lakabas, Sosugi, Yamlen Jeba, the Shalapa, she, Jimbatan, Don, the Yaburesha, said. Niki, Jeremy Chiki, Loma, like Keshe, Kiran, Atisha, Yakuresha, some big, do soon do, Loma, Samla Kariomasene, or that Lami in Jeba, the Tisha, Lami Alia, to Yakuresha, Sungu, some died to Corona, and simply a Bobo Cherdra, the new and Yamlen Jagi, Bezul Mason, the Shuk Cherdra, Yungurwa, the Lamigi, the Negi. Navi Genji Horolia, Be Chicken, Yamlejel, Kulmol Mason, the Shukshibu Tigor, Mijanda, Sumba, Chevale, Lamegi to Sang Sumbana, Sosolia, Semjul Mashona, and Cherryada, and the Kumar Shu Tigorwa, says I dinigi, Gova Jim Tenjine, and Jeremy Shiki Dusine, Lomiki Keshe Yende, Dus Sungorwada.
Bearing in mind what we are studying here, this is the response, the written response from Lama Tsongkhapa to the request received from his student Namkapel. So Lama Tsongkhapa here is explicitly praising his student in writing. He's saying, you are intelligent, you know what should be engaged in, and you are, and you know what should be abandoned, and you are doing that. Moreover, you have stable faith in the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings and in your Lama. And you have a deep desire to know or understand the teachings of the Buddha and cultivate them within, meditate on them. And to bring this about, or to enhance your knowledge and your meditation, you here have made offerings. So the student is being praised by his teacher here, and Lama Tsongkhapa is doing this for a specific reason. It's to inspire his student, to give Namkapel confidence that he is training well, he's training well in accordance with his teacher's advice. So Lama Tsongkhapa, through praising his student, is encouraging him to continue in his training.
Di me jerum che di suma di dus chen ngang zo samda chik ni su ro shi sa war ni su ko hero shi ma do ro da di ko zam ji da ngang zo tum di shi sho shi ba na shi ngang zo chik da de bro chik lo ba chi lu gyu lo ba ro sam ta we na ngang zo le sem la o di ne je di ne sum wa re de le sum wa re se ni su di sa ha go ya re ma do ngang zo sam lo na lo gyu wa sha ro ha sa ma da di gi gyu wa ro ya ge don da la ngang zo le 가르 냠스 랭고스는 제름 제가나즈를 가르스 코르슨 디 가르송 코르슨 다음 르드 사신 세디기 나즈ल्या 디 랍제데 나즈 냠스 랭고로와 냠스 렘비 갑라 지산 르드 사신 세디 레니 겐 넘버 제 제투근 삼로디 셰럽 제바 제고레스 레니 디 야제 디신의 약고레 디신의 약 말에선 제바 제고레 제바 제신데 수우천 삼나 제바 제나 하고 그래 세데 제바 제고레스 르드 사신 the dushin the chebache. Oh, Dijena, Ben house dushin some davan, Shiro, Korosavana, Korosana carrying good to be Shimjuchina, Koros also Korosana, so like you woman, so Kala Savane, Kala Shimbuchina, you woman, so Chidilia, Robota Dusina, de la Gishi, Awashi, Matoba, and you may so like you may by Yungu Asembe. That's also give me about the corner later and the city, Kanaba Tik Duja turn. Don't get number and then Yakmeva do, and the Pasha rang a till you immediately, same Mike watch or the coin to the minute temple, chick at 2 minutes some jet, pie, dredge and chagger, Mishan, give me was do some danda, contra said the game, Ranley, give me by Mishan like you me into us, the woman doors and pay some logic, the how watch, the nigger some da. That dinner, and together, jam this, jam some gently, pemper that zero some now and then. Digi Sosugi Shanla Zewe de Pembe Samnotide, Samno Digi Dongi, Numgudi in a bed chick, meat horn and Galana Joy, Numgushiada, Kanamaki Shevena, Zingyambo, share the Nimbushe, and Pasha de Kawia. And did Mishanda again a Galana Chada, and Mishanda to Galan Chad, Mishanda is only a socially kissing Yambushiada, don't get Numgudi, so say Galana Chakibu. Chizan dine some dadu, Jambia some dana, some no diletine. Rangla Gawu, Mele Gawu Yada, Ranjinigala, Diki Yungduas, Dusin Jebachine, Jezam, Lutte Sashing, said the Lenny number Cheba, Conra Gena Yakumindu, Jewu Yakumindu, Jamte Gomna, Jewu Diakudu, D. Jewu Yakundu, some not Naji, D. Lenny number Cheba, Hakuba Jewu, yes, Lutte Sashing, said Dilia. Just not the yellow decision.
I just want to take this opportunity to repeat an important point made this morning, which is that we should not relate to any teaching, whether any of these verses or a book we're reading or any other teaching we receive, as being a mere imparting of information, relating to it as if it's just a story, it's interesting, some historical information, and moving on. This is not the way to relate to the Dharma. It's not like reading an article or a novel. Rather, one should take every teaching that one hears or book that one reads as being direct advice for your own spiritual development coming from the spiritual teacher for you. So when reading something like this, when you read luminous intelligence, the way to relate then to those first words is recognize or to ask oneself, what is Lama Tsongkhapa saying to me here? And luminous intelligence, we understand, refers to understanding clearly. So the word luminous can also be the word for clear. So having the intelligence to clearly understand what should be adopted and what should be abandoned. And how does one come to know that? Not just through having learned words, but using your intelligence. And using your intelligence means thinking for yourself, investigating and analyzing. So for example, we have heard anger is only harmful, whereas love and compassion are beneficial. So we've heard that the anger then is to be abandoned, love and compassion are to be developed. But merely knowing that is insufficient. We need to use our intelligence. So why is anger harmful? So we recount our own lived experience of both having been angry and having been around angry people, or people when they are angry. And we know from when we are angry, our mental peace is completely destroyed. Moreover, if one is really enraged, one will lose one's appetite, one will not be able to sleep well, one will not enjoy the company of one's dear friends. And moreover, when one expresses that anger, one will hurt those, even those that matter most to us. So in this way, we come to see for ourselves the faults of anger, recognizing that it only brings harm to ourselves, and when we express it, to others too. Whereas on the other hand, love and compassion, when those are dominant within, this is shown through our body, like through our facial expression, and we know how we feel when we see someone whose mind is relaxed and calm, as opposed to someone who's enraged. Moreover, we know how we relate to someone when they are talking in a way, perhaps we've done nothing wrong, but they're taking their anger out on us. Or equally, when they are expressing their love and compassion towards us. Again, we may have done nothing, but we know which of those two people whose presence we would enjoy much more. So we can thereby, through recalling our lived experience, recognize that when our mind is truly loving and compassionate towards others, oneself is much happier. One's own mind is at peace and spacious, and one has a warm and embracing attitude towards all others. So therefore, we can come to recognize that love and compassion benefits oneself as well as others. Whereas anger, again, this entire class from annoyance and frustration up to rage and hatred, this only brings harm for oneself and harms for others. So this is then how to understand or how to relate to reading something like luminous intelligence.
Dinigi, that Jezan Tela, Tamati, Denibe Tamadilla, Tela, Jukurba, City, Jezan Ter, City, Dambong Anzulia, Lame, and Lama, the Givishins, and ya, Sanji Sunshepe, Che, the Pasu, Tebe, that the Ter, didn't show or didn't show or didn't see your Marcel Labjashorwa, or didn't double Ter, and the Tebe Dundalia, the some Daja, or Dichen, Yakuyungu, Sido, didn't hear Banaji, Sumbanaji, Yakuyungu, and I mean the Pachi Shimju. And there's some of the Nishana Ganga takes to the Yunguyan and the Shimjuchi Chebache, Duche Chebache, how go on to, or that is Shevana Atisha, Jamjokona, Padu Yungudu, the Nigi, Korosana, Yun Reshata, Sumbata, Resha, and Big, how go into the Nigi, Chebache, Turbache, Tube, Dunalas, Chebache, no Losai, Dampo, Losai, Ripas, Ludia says at the Chebache, Jim. The Chebachido, the Ni, or Damon Sanji, so you want to temper Resha, said Big Yishe. That we need to Tongjang on the Tongu, and it's I use but only Demparesha and Biggie. Ishi Devasili did, Deva Timbo, Sawa Timbo Chagoreja. The Nigi Timbo Chando didn't also get Yamlinche, Sospa, Jim Yamlinche, come, the social Shimbadi, and the social Shimbadi Shanpa Lap. Jimbatan said that on Jimbatan, Sanzing Jimbatan, Chugi Jimbatan, Lui Jimbatan, Jimbamangora Dinza, Sosuke, Gangashin, but Pashan, Lap, and Jiba Jania, Digi to your Pembali, do Jehores, or do Shine, and Jigga, Dine, Sanzing Tony. Sosuke Nube Ganshoki, Shania Rocha, Pembadria, to Jehores, Sumba Nashi, then he did the jeans and better, Sosorangi, Jerim, Chitingalia, Sungorchesa, then Anzuki, Chitin Yaman Cheo, the chickens and be some starche, then on chickens if some danger, the name on Zuki, Tabache, Tubutuna, some da, the niggy some da, Lenigi, Yabu Hagwadi, and to some Nana, Yane, Yando, Yane, and the Gomshis, some Gomshus did that, the some did that, two in the Gomshus. Some of the Yana Yado Jamje sometime, some of the Gidina Jamje, the shoe church, or the Gidina Jamje, some of the layer now, corner the new dread, the Chahora, the names are Dushin and Zuki, to some Dinyam Chahor, yes, it hung to Dushin, Sungor, Tangas in the tennis cheese and big some of them over that.
The last word in the second line, that of hearing. So hearing or study is something of great importance. So when one sees a term like this, what should come to mind is, I need to hear the teachings of the Buddha, hear the teachings from my spiritual teacher, because this gathering of knowledge is the very foundation upon which I can cultivate luminous intelligence. It's only through gathering knowledge that we can come to intellectually understand what should be adopted and abandoned. And on that basis of this intellectual knowledge, I can integrate that through engaging or meditating, using my intelligence, thinking for myself, using analysis and an investigation to see whether what I'm being told I should adopt, in other words, ways of thinking to adopt, and ways of thinking that should be abandoned, whether this is correct or not. So therefore, hearing is the basis for engaging with luminous intelligence. And it's to the extent that one cultivates or meditates on what one has heard, what one has studied, whilst using one's intelligence, that will come to see the validity of the Buddha's teachings, and thereby develop faith, or a synonym for faith is trust. Trust in the teachings of the Buddha, and thereby the Buddha himself. Because we'll be developing trust in the teachings because we will be experiencing their effectiveness. It's through experiencing the effectiveness of the teachings that we will trust the teachings. We will know that we can place our faith in them, have confidence in them, because of our own lived experience. And moreover, as one is engaging in this process of hearing, and as one is hearing and engaging again, meaning meditating, using our intelligence, we will also see the need to engage in generosity, another mind that is to be adopted. So generosity takes many forms. It's presented in 3 different ways. One is material generosity. A second is giving fearlessness, which is protecting life. And the third is developing the practice, giving of the Dharma. So either teaching the Dharma or cultivating it within. So there are many ways to give, but generosity really comes down to this. It is developing an attitude, a mind of wanting to give of ourselves. So we see here, by these 2 lines, we come to see the advice from Lama Tsongkhapa to us, is that I need to engage ever more in hearing or studying, and utilizing my intelligence whilst meditating, cultivating these teachings within myself, such as generosity, and thereby developing stable faith in the teachings. So this is what we can take from these 2 lines. And one last point to make. The way to engage in the teachings is to meditate. And this word meditate, its synonyms are habituation or familiarization. Because what meditation is deepening our habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, and we do so through engaging in this process of thinking, of meditation, repeatedly over a sustained period. And conjoined with that, we break our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. To the extent we cultivate a strength of habituation to wholesome ways of thinking, we break our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. This is the meaning of meditation, or in this line, the word engage.
Namga Bayi Ring Jing Bayi Chiyik Ciduen Sanxin Yambinga Sidda Jisa Namga Pasan Sadiga Loma Namga Pasan Ring Sid Tarin Bonia Jingba Sid Dangbasi or Jingbasan Dangbasi or Jasa Chiyik Sid Yisi, the Denation or Jesa Namga Pasangi Tarin Bonia Malia Duchine Church Sunro Shesn Yisi Nasha or Jingbayi Jingbayi Chiyik said. She's did the Yigi Ganesh to Sena Yigi Jin Yixia, Tigduan Sanshi, Yambing as a Tig Pe Jig, Tig the Yambu Huge, Tig Yambu and the Yaboche, and Dunda de la Sambo, Dunda Yabotus, Dunda. The Dunda Yabo said, Jig Yamle Yimbata, do Sunro Shela that, which is not Dunda doing Sanshings, Yambing as a debate Yanga, Tig, Jam Jig. Similar table shows was to so that Angela Namga Pesangi read the Tarimboni Lumba Tarimbon to Tavares, Jingy Tavares. Then he sick the conditions and bed 60 bear or shots in Joshe and don't have to gain a jig nga ane kone chimboraya donda nga le ya pyonjoraya donda di go ma she ba je nyamlen je ge chue che di jin ne nya la da tarba tamji kimbo go bon toye ge donda nyamlen rimba ji de ne song ro she song donda di re sha je sang de ne donda di be ya bo le she sang bo le sha sa de ne ge chi de nyambo ya bo du sa de yi ge de 남가 발상기 당시비 이기기 캐셔로서 마소나 아도 죄자당 안에 이게 치되게다 경영하다 되네도 야고도 송거다.
The last two lines. Nam Kapel sent from a distant place a letter of meaningful, wholesome and pleasant words. So, as mentioned, Nam Kapel is a student of Lama Tsongkhapa's, and he composed a letter which is beautiful in its composition. And moreover, the motivation that he is expressing is what is meant by meaningful and wholesome. So it wasn't just merely an eloquent or well-crafted letter, which is of pleasant words, but he's expressing a wholesome motivation. Namely, that in this letter, he's not asking for example, material aid, but he's asking for aid or assistance in his ongoing spiritual development. So Lama Tsongkhapa here is praising his students for primarily the motivation with which he sent this request.
Dan jisan namga pesan ki jerum chilya chue sunro chesna yigi chi kurwa tene yigi zamai ba yigi de nyomdo da jerum chil puya gi nyambar so to mangpu ji nyamdo puya da puya gar puya sene puya sa ndi sungor da Geshe Thubten Rabten Dibi Murmi Geshen Songwa Soba Yi Yiwong Jiemang Gurwa Ponyawe Masang Meba Dagi Gamdu Tres.
As we see in the second verse, Namka Pel sent this letter from a distant place, and he didn't send the letter unaccompanied, but he sent it with many gifts. And in the third line, these gifts or offerings are mentioned. In the third verse, Messengers were sent with many delightful gifts, such as the finest statues of bodhisattvas, a collection of Guru Samaja texts, and a pair of saffron victory banners, all of which were accepted. Geshe Generasi la soba da jambe ya la soba da dinigi njige deso janju sembe ke nane da ya zo de su Geshe se de janju semba ju tuo sen zo ru che ro de su gu su se de dinigi gu ro pyu se ra gu ro ye sa ra da bene jambe yang gu ro de jan de gu ka re nam de ne gu ro je sa ra pyu de ya de gu che an du bi gu se de da sa du bi gu ro me de pe che ro Bejer Denesia, Jeremil Puyo Sarvada, Geshe Thubten Kusu, Dubi Gu Sede, and the Geshe Chanju Sembala Soba Deneku, Kundra Dang, and the Beja, Sama Dubi Gulas or Bejaroj, Dusine Ya Pusha, those Puyadik Zedig to Dusura. So in this verse, the English translation and the Tibetan, the order is quite mixed, so we'll bounce around a little bit. So the Tibetan starts with mentioning what it is that was offered. So we see the finest statues of bodhisattvas. So this then refers to statues probably of great bodhisattvas such as Chenrezig or Manjushri. So this word translated as finest can also be translated as main. So you could say the main statues of the main bodhisattvas, namely Chenrezig and Manjushri, as well as a collection of Guru Samaja texts. So these are part of the offerings that were made with the request.
And then Murmi Geshe Songwa Soba Yi said, Murmi said that Dulo Chuyen Nam Sum Rochin Yerwa, Denegi, Jermchelia, Puyo, Deneg to Loras, Murmi. And then Geshe said that the Dugan, that Chube, Geshe said, Denegi, Song said the Chasora, Cha, Ni, Song or Denegi. Murmi Dulota and Jasengi, so Denega Cha La Sopa, Sedina de Shanda de Jala Yusor, or this Dansha or this Dusor.
The Tibetan continues, and a pair of saffron victory banners. Saffron, of course, here refers not to the actual substance, but rather the victory banner being dyed the color of saffron. So saffron one would see traditionally in the teaching halls and the monasteries. And a pair, so we know that there would have been two. And then we have the term such as, which then shows that not only were statues of bodhisattvas, Guru Samaja text, and this pair of victory banners offered, but there were offerings beyond this as well.
The Yuan Jie Mang Guru said, Yuan Jie Mang said, just a Yidua, Ninchevo, then a Nyamba Jie and Nyambala, then a Mangu Gusha or that is so the Garasoras and Ben Geshe and Yusembi, Zoe, Gusula, so Kundrada, and the Beja Sound Gula Soba, and the Dulo, and the Gelsen, La So Bege, Be Yidu Moege, Ninchevo, similar Kavuke. The Nyambatish Mangu Kushas or the Yuan Jemang Gurus.
The third line in the Tibetan, our first line, that's Lama Tsongkhapa then mentions that these were many delightful gifts. So he's expressing his delight or the delight in receiving these many gifts. So that just emphasizes it's not just what is mentioned here explicitly, but there were gifts in addition to these.
That is the Bendigo Guru and the Sanashin Chahol Taskayo Marwa. The Sana, the boss is done with the Taskayo Maranyama, and the Michilu Guru Michigi to sketch and Chitan Bodogorwa. Says the Niki de la Ponyawas or Ponyas and Mikus and Miki on Giorwa. Benanga Jalaki on Ponyawas. Kurongi Midilia, Dinjala, Dinin Yawashu, the Sukushas, the new Kuke Midi, Keong and Midis, Ponyawagi, Masam Dagi come to church, said Chazan, Kuronguya Chazam, Masam Matsama, Chazan Yang Rason, she were the Rason Kunga, Jason, Jebating other Jorson, she were the Ponyawe, Masam Dagi come to church.
For us, the very first words, messengers. So this in the ancient times was the only way to send something from here to there. It was long before postal delivery service. So one would need to either send a student or someone to act as a messenger. And Lama Tsongkhapa is saying that the messenger delivered all of these gifts. And then for us, the last line, all of which were accepted, all of these were received.
I mean, the church you and the Bendigo, trade the bear must is our chambers. Tis trading on to say these are my Tarbana Kazikiwachima, Hada Mugo, Montoya, Tarbada, Tamji Kimiko, Montoy, Dingy, the whole Tobiaki, Tablam Jiggy, Inza, trade the bear, but the Zarchamburi said, Tangan Zarchambudi Inza, these Zarchambudi, Shuagi, Dondalia, and Lamalia, and to get Dushin, the Chevo, Pujan, that Dushin. To get church war, edge, what they've been, Dinny, Jisan Church was a poor prayer, they don't that this church against Archibald, Diraya, Dondalia, and the Jig Park, Sosuki Bay, the new share the Kawu Shure, some then Zarchimo Shujin, some Jet, and Lamalia, Dusin, Yamba, Chu prayer, the Chagurwa. Bene Nima Dumba San Yujum, the Sangin, the Waranas, the Chu Kolo, Gordugablena, Ninjig, Tangbala Soba. The Gashin Lasso Bay, Chu Kolo, Bene, say you Kolo, Zip Dona, Dembaji, then they preach in there, Chusung Rogers, and then they preach and Chusung Rogers, Ma, Shujan San Yu Chusung, or Dinashin, that Lamimi, Lomegi, Lama Jerem Chelia, then they get Zedi, preaching and other Chusung Rogers, Duchine, Dus Chagor, that.
When one is requesting a Dharma teaching, it should be requested with the understanding that there is nothing of greater value than the teachings of the Buddha. Because it's through receiving teachings of the Buddha that one can come to understand and thereby develop the paths within that lead to the attainment of lasting happiness, the attainment of enlightenment. And there's nothing that one desires more than lasting, stable happiness. Hence, the value one should place on teachings. And therefore, offerings are made so as to show the sincerity of one's request and the extent to which one truly values the teachings that are being requested. And the precedent for this was at the time immediately following when Buddha Shakyamuni showed enlightenment. Only after the various gods made requests, offerings and requests to the Buddha to teach, did the Buddha teach. So the gods such as Brahma made offerings, offered a jeweled Dharma wheel to the Buddha to show the sincerity, both the sincerity of their intent as well as the value that they placed on the teachings. So with that understanding, when one requests teachings, one should do so with a sincere appreciation that nothing is of greater value.
이나 소소라는 그 두신 대비 강지는 푸베나 소소야 푸비게 대신 안주게 다 셰서 슈나 최고 푸야래 셰서 맞는 짐바 당와래 디기 푸비게 쇠남디 소소레 민고 되보도 소소 민고래 찌네 디래 찌네 소소라는 배직 야 푸이네 안지야 최고 푸이 안디네 슈연도 소소야 미세게 대바당 대바다나 대바도 숙체리고래 대바가지 숙체리면 디zem지 소소라는야 냠는지알래 셈리야 셈고 숙체티도 거래 제가 되네긴자 푸야로시데 디레마도 인지미다 아직 먼저 삼나라 어디 최지 부야지 마시네 디 총로지야지 제마지 렘베네 총로와 디로지 차기도 선배 삼는 코스요라디 말에 인지미지다 푸구구레베스네 푸고야 말다 소소게 감나메바 최슈야게 되바 되니르 여바이나 라마틀전네 송로체스네 최 송구로와 제가 상기에 다가와 제르메칠레드네리 제가 인지미지 푸고야 이내 소소라는 거 소놈 사이에 된다리야 두시네 푸고거래 제가 디 푸비 제부딩은 되지 데데 개와치마 라다미고 원데 덴델이야 제부 디기주비야 디기 아니 진비 제부도 고고리 사지 손와나신 데네 푸비 쇠남데다 쇠남 빠도메 봐 디 제부데 몽바나 소소라리야 지게 튕게야고 용야데 손남 사투고래 튕게야고 용아 마세 미야 옹두두야 옹 소소 옹탕 진부 차야기 손남 사고래 왕탕 니버친부 차야기 손남 사고래 이제 디니기 푸이베 김선을 지되네래.
On this point, it's important to understand the reasons behind making offerings and why it is something that is so regularly done. Because it's very easy to misunderstand, taking the general attitude from our society that this is like business, whereby one needs to give in order to receive. And this is how our society works. It's not the case with the Dharma, because even without making offerings, if the causes for those teachings to be given and received are accumulated, the teachings will be given. An offering is not required. Rather, from the side of the person who wants to receive the teaching, by them making an offering, doing so with a sincere and a wholehearted motivation, they will firstly accumulate extensive merit, and secondly, through this being a genuine expression of their faith or their trust in the qualities of the teachings, that faith or trust will aid their motivation to repeatedly over a sustained period engage in cultivating those teachings within. So with such an understanding, when one practices generosity or makes offerings, when requesting teachings, it's not with an attitude of business, where I've made my offering, now give me the teaching. It's with a clear understanding that in order to be able to radically transform my mind and to transform my mind in a way that's lasting, I need to accumulate merit. And thereby, what I have in abundance, I will give, so as I can achieve something of far greater value. So with an understanding of the need for merit and of the karmic results that follow, such as having favorable circumstances for one's ongoing spiritual journey in lives to come, one makes offerings. Also knowing that teachings will be given without even a request, and certainly without offerings being made. They are not indispensable for teachings to be given, but rather from the side of the student wanting to receive the karmic result so as to aid their ongoing spiritual development and their capacity to be of ever greater benefit to others. So this is the way to understand making offerings to request teachings.
Tadin ma disungorya jerimchige munje pember mawi jesu lap dadun leshe katun zöshi ser munje damba namle che lape dambar njiwa jiyama chi moes.
The fourth verse. Having trained in the beneficial guidance I've received, please bestow again a festival of eloquent teachings. There are no personal instructions whatsoever that are greater than the spiritual guidance already received.
Munje pember mawa jesu lap dadun leshe katun zöshi ser sedu da yignalya dadidi kandi tishasne dus tishasi orda munje pember mawi jesu lap sede nyema jerimchi koronlia chema usungyo sarwa 결혼기 년마 원치 펜바르마와서 알리아 펜베 제베 삼다제 알리아 nen지게 주냠랭기 심바템바텔라 마송바텔리아 니 안치게 냠랭지기여서데 원지 펜바마비 제술랍세데 이날이야 두스티에서 제름지 결혼한 년마 알리아 두신 제왕 알리아 펜베 삼다제 알리아 최송샤바텔리아 니 냠랭지기여서 원지 펜바마비 제술랍세 이게 되네나 이게 나를 두스티어에서 지도서래.
As we see, the first two lines are a quotation from the requesting letter from Namkapel to Lama Tsongkhapa. And from this we can tell that they have already established teacher-student relationship whereby Lama Tsongkhapa has given extensive teachings to Namkapel in the past. And Namkapel here is showing his gratitude and appreciation for those teachings, saying that he has already put those into practice, he's trained his mind in them, and they've benefited him so much. So therefore, in this quotation, Namkapel is showing his gratitude and appreciation for teachings already bestowed.
And the Nuine Lashes the Yamlenjiki Rimba and the Jike Malia Dushine Sonrochi and Tishas or the Dun Lashe Katun the Dun Lashe Katun Suja said the Nuindine Malia and Jike Yamlenji Rimba and Jike Dushin Masonrochi said Dushin Tishas.
Now Capel is saying quite explicitly, those teachings you have given me have been of such great benefit, and not just because they're pleasant to hear, but because I have trained in them. The Tibetan is a bit more explicit, so having received them, I subsequently trained in them. So he's making it very clear, he has trained in what he has received. Therefore, because from my own experience, because I've experienced the benefit of those teachings you have given, now the second line, please again bestow a festival of eloquent teachings. Therefore, he's requesting further teachings, further guidance.
Dondala deji namga pesange jerum chelia yigi tigyo nanu donda yigi gadrishasne direda tigyo chojade munche pembar mawa chiso lapsede kyoronge nyema ngale ya chue songyo dingi donda de samdan nyamlen chigyes ndiyore and the new indine ngale ya nyamlen chigi rimba an chigma songro chi esne du choja titisha asi ordade.
So therefore, Lama Tsongkhapa is making very clear the request that Namkapel has made, which is firstly, the teachings you have given me already, I didn't merely just receive them, but I've done as you asked. I've trained my mind, I've cultivated them within, and I've come to experience a great benefit. Therefore, please give me further guidance, give me further teachings.
That Nama Yi Dankan Dia Chu Shugan Regu Shu Yi Dankan de Surias and the Chige Namga Pesans, Koron, Namga Pesan, Koronga Loma La Sopari. That Yigista, Yi the Nyamdu and then Nyambaros and the Bajik, Dinit in the Puya, in the Tasha, Tingat Chasan Jorson, Osachi. That you don't know Carson and Jorangi. Jerem Chinyama Song Shaking, Chu Song getting in Yamlin Jedela, Dunda Changu, Yakwa Changu, and the no India, Chu Song Roches, Atisha said, Laduchene, Namgapas and Yigitangan, Chu Shurot, Song Roches, Yigitangan, and Namgapas, digging Alia, Chu Sonya, the Yambatin in the Kursha, and the Yigi Chujanala, Dennis Capsha said, Maduchin Songarda.
What we see in these verses that we've looked at in this session is that the requester of further teachings is Lama Tsongkhapa's student, Nam Kapel, and he has a Dharma, clearly established Dharma relationship with Lama Tsongkhapa. And that relationship has borne fruit within Nam Kapel. In other words, the teachings that he has already received, he has put them into practice and thereby transformed his mind. And now, so as to continue his journey of spiritual development, he has turned to his spiritual teacher, Lama Tsongkhapa, and written a well-composed letter with expressing sincere motivation to for his ongoing spiritual development. And this letter, which was delivered by messengers, was accompanied by many gifts. And all of those were received by Lama Tsongkhapa. So this has been established here.
Dadi anzuge dadi jungri karso digi nesuro shi denige anzuge da jushin jikshing bache hawo bache. Dadi anzulya digi di lobe de anzuge da nyamsulya le anzu kyapsan le ya anzu semlya nyamlen de karchi ore labna. Du shin lo da anzu samlas ta che. Namga pasan sia de jerum chigi loma jerum chida satarin bu jilya shugore. Chesam Kurong Mingone Rane Jerum Chig Soyagi, Yamasum Chula Yamlenji, the New India Yamlin Yarget Naya Dondala, and Tarim Bunia, and Jig Jerum Chile Chu Sun Roches, and the Yigi Tayada, and Jerum Chile Pua Puya Soba, then the Puare, then the Puade Midige Mile Dance and Mishando, Kirochi Pachado, Jigel Dawa, and Shapata Dawa Mangu, Lam Gangaji Ducian Judge. Denigi, Ma. 지게 제름제 최슈데 배 마세냠네 데니스나도 배 오래도와 선배기 지수 일하지야 되다. 다 건축이 되네 제ben다 당 안수 삼다베나 안수려 집에 튕겨야고 다녀사 있는 아주기 라면전에 변행 아주 제 라면전에 최슈고이나 다야나라 라면 손셰게 되는 막 그기디나 소소 다른 분은 봐 안지게 녀모 꾸르지네 안 다른 분에 이게 다디 제목어제 거두 걸어서 연초죠 고가 빼야고르샤 디네자 소소라나 디네기 건축이 냠는 제바 나진 소소의 고급 유디 갑이야 소소기 단 냠는데 후다바다 지긴 선배게 당아주기 디네기 냠는 지긴 선배 삼로도 당고에 당아주 계시 뭐 차고래 디네 삼다베나 디네기 당아주 두신데 디유 토네 알아들이야 랍질이야데 소소의 냠는 더 자야도 두신 제베나 응아주 디 지긴 선배 건축 디네 빼 강하다 디네 다른 거 디네 주변에 이땅 밀리아 꾸마다 두신 다른 분 두신 마연직 최슈제 이게 뒤마땅 되는 마진 얌면진 빼야고 제도 왔어. 대나상 알아주는데 고급이하고 딜레 고급 상하 요런서 다 되니기 고급이라 돼. 아니 지 고급 철라마다 와지. 아니 홀다 받아 지긴 선배게. 모두시네 삼다 정한 저 얌면지 고래서디 다 디기 인한 저 랍질해야 돼 디레다.
The way we should relate to what Lama Tsongkhapa has written here is, as mentioned, we should relate to it. Whilst it is clearly explicitly written for Nam Kapel, but we should relate to it as if it's written for ourselves. And we do this by recognizing that Nam Kapel is being praised here by his teacher, by Lama Tsongkhapa, being praised for clearly having made great effort in training his mind in the teachings already received, and therefore through having experienced the benefits of these previous teachings. He, from a great distance, is requesting further guidance. So when it was stated that this request was made from a great distance or a distant place, we can understand that the messengers that were then subsequently sent probably had to travel by foot for several months. And they were traveling with great hardships, carrying many gifts with them in order to hand deliver a letter. So this is something done which required quite some effort, not just merely of putting together some gifts and composing a letter, but for messengers to be sent over some considerable distance. This shows the value that a student places in his teachings. And this we should take inspiration from, especially when we compare to our own very fortunate situation. These days, on the internet, we can access teachings so easily and without any effort, without any expense. And so here, we should rejoice in our great good fortune, but also recognize that this great fortune has come about in dependence on causes we have created. So we should utilize this opportunity well, not take it for granted, not let it go to waste, and thereby strengthen our determination to study and meditate on the teachings of the Dharma, and do so repeatedly over a sustained period, because that is the way to bring about a lasting change in our way of thinking. So this then is how we should relate to what's presented here, using it as inspiration to not let a moment go to waste, but to train with the same determination that these great practitioners of the past also trained, and put to good use our excellent circumstances that we have in our modern times.
ane chige yige tinis tang so yige na le an nyemba tin ku sha yige jeja na le tinis du se di ne se de pa char la da chane da den ma da jerim chige ma ya da nam ga pa sa le yige ti ya na la du sin sung go da so ya de ko zu go den ma.
So the first verse, we saw Lama Tsongkhapa's homage to the Buddha, where Lama Tsongkhapa generated a sincere faith and respect for the Buddha, and offered veneration to the Buddha. Thereafter, he made specific reference to his student, Tsongkhapa, and praised his endeavors, referring to the gifts that were received, carried by the messengers, and the motivation behind the letter that was composed, and so forth. Now, in the middle of the fourth verse, we come to the start of Lama Tsongkhapa's new teaching to his students.
Adinma monje damba namle che la bes dambar jiba ji yama chi me sede monje damba namle che la be ne sede nyema kyoralya che du su su shung sung yo res ur dang edu sung yo res damba nge da monje damba de kyoro du su nge je gores ma damba na yo res dile sherage la ba si da de she mixe kai me du so monje damba namle che la be da nyema sung yo dan do bu re dile she hu de nyema ma sung yo khabar do pha ba ji kan she yo ma re so monje damba namle che la be dambar ki wa ji ya ma chi me kan ya min du so nyema sung yo de do bu dile la ba ji shara che la ba de mixe ge ji ge nyema de na je wa gi ne me de da de shi hu ya ko re se de she kan min du so
Lama Tsongkhapa then starts with saying, there are no personal instructions whatsoever that are greater than the spiritual guidance already received. So the very first thing he says to Tsongkhapa is actually, you've already received the teachings of the Buddha Dharma. There's nothing much more really to say than what has already been said.
Dida chibare nyama jese jiwa la chimbege juju sonya ge sonya dendi shuje da ma sonya ya jese jiwa la chimbege loma ti le kishi ti wa re so ra ne che ne je ganesh che go le skang zo ya che ganesh che go le ne ma jiwa re ma jiwa da wa re ne loma khashi ge den ya che nyama ma song gyo ji sa wa chi lo chi la re ji de.
This is similar to the account from Shantideva, when he was asked to give a teaching to the assembled community. He asked them, what do you want to hear? And the response was, well, tell us something that hasn't been said before. Give us something new.
said, Munji Majua and Dirjumes, Niamagi mi Sangye the Lasso, but Chu Sum Mason Gurjing Alasava, how show Maris. She's an E that is shared Niama and the Sangye and Janus Bashanda, soon Sargodi, and she was. She's that Niama Shema so much Gurjing and share Hayamaris. Munji Majua, Dirjume, Munji Majua, Niamaji, Mashevachi, Sabaching as share Hayamaris, Dirjumes, share Mesor.
In fact, Shantideva's reply is very similar to what Lama Tsongkhapa wrote here. His reply is, there actually isn't anything new to be said. All that there is to be said has already been taught by the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So there really is nothing to add to this.
제가 원제 담바남 다디디나는 원제 담바남에 첼라베 담버기바 지야마치면서 원체 단예마 상계다 장주sem바 라마샨다기 송셰비게 당 코로나 송보이 되는게 냠레 제랄 하바 디수일레 저메달 시우 사바싱하셰메스 제가 지바레서다 제상 나중에 매 송고로다 don다라 가르송으로스네 제르 미치기 최송교신나 대지게스 시월에 치면서 최송교디야 코로이네 상계 줌된데 상계 줌된데 마 기베 라마스 코로나 라마스네 최슈 라마디제네 최슈에도 코로나 냠는 제제 마 로마라 송고로 준주 송고로와 디나신 제르 미치네 코로나게다 야 상계 줌된데 마 무튀지 마 상계 줌 당보 자유 상계 줌네 송바제 데나마 라메라 규제 라메 소소라랑 라메제네 최슈 라메 송교디 소소이 냠네제 띵냠네제 바데 샨다 시고로와 송고로와 제사 원제 마중와 원제 마셰바지 니 사와셰야가요 말해서 월다 원제 담바 남레 첼라베 니마 미 송데네게 마 담마디 여바지 마도 여바지 니바 송야마도 원제 담마 라마다 샨다 마 송교지 니 사바가야 셰야요 말다 아세도 도나디르와다.
Lama Tsongkhapa is really saying the same thing as Shantideva by saying, in Lama Tsongkhapa's case, that what I've already taught you, or in Shantideva's case, what you've been taught by bodhisattvas and by what you have been taught by bodhisattvas, all of this is an unbroken lineage coming from Buddha Shakyamuni himself. And Buddha Shakyamuni taught the complete and unmistaken path to cultivate within in order to achieve enlightenment and independence on that so many beings have done so. And being true to the unmistaken lineage of teachings, what you have heard is nothing new. What you've heard thus far is the complete path. There has been no reason for anyone to say anything new because there's nothing to be added. The complete and unmistaken path was taught by Buddha Shakyamuni and kept alive by the subsequent lineage of great teachers. So therefore, I have nothing new to say to you. In fact, I, Lama Tsongkhapa, have already taught you, Namkapel, all you need to know in order to achieve enlightenment.
wenjang guibar nyonla yangda yang lebar damna kebar topgyurte shindu nyewi chudik lungba yi chechir chebe zhala jijinos.
The fifth verse. Just like through a great many soft water droplets falling onto an enormous boulder, only if you keep listening respectfully again and again to correct teachings will you attain excellent qualities.
원장 시대 제가 원체 지게 마송비게 최지 말이야 사업한 시에요 말이 이나양의 지게 소수게 냠용 여바드마 자하고바드마 경험을 셰바 이나서래 원장 귀버는요라 소소스 제르미저 코롱게 냠는제 냠용디마 경험을 셰바 이나시고르바다 원장 귀버는요라 양의 양 세디 경험을야 배직될야 대바다 귀버체 야네 야도 망해 시교들이야 야네 야도 년제 퇴바제 안디던다라 야네 야도 삼 디네 야네도 곰파이나 야게 두그레스 고모도 두그레스 원장 귀버녀라 야나 양 제디 야네야 레버 야나도 삼다 야나에 퇴바 야나 삼다 디니제반네 레버 담나싱이 데냠는제 셰셰교들라 안 냠는 제바이나 kebar tobar gyurti esi kyonsa samlo gewechi nyamnendi yarge duguri esi yarge yunguri esi.
In the fifth verse, we look at the third and fourth line first. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, only if you keep listening respectfully again and again to correct teachings will you attain excellent qualities. So here he is saying to Namkapel that only if you keep listening respectfully. So listening as we heard earlier, means both hearing and studying the excellent teachings, and respectfully includes making effort in one's meditation on what one is hearing. So only by doing this again and again, or repeatedly over a sustained period, will you attain excellent qualities. And what you listen to, so correct teachings, here refers to Lama Tsongkhapa saying, what I'm teaching based on my knowledge and my experience based on that knowledge. What I'm giving you are correct or valid teachings. So only by listening to these and meditating on them repeatedly over a sustained period with effort, will you attain excellent qualities. In other words, will you transform your mind, cultivate the Dharma within your mind.
차고 더디네 안 추틱배 춘춘지네 디기파 야네 무티도 신마상에도 안 더디려야 균 가서 얘긴 포야 돼 가서리 이제 차고 더디네 안 될이야 안 이건 비야라서 용고레스 신도지위 니위 추틱 롱과이 체체를 차백에 자라 지신노 베디나시 에서다.
And to emphasize this need to make effort repeatedly over a sustained period, Lama Tsongkhapa then presents an illustration. So for us, it's the first two lines. Just like through a great many soft water droplets falling onto an enormous hard boulder. So just like single droplets of water falling onto a boulder, at first this won't make much difference. But after an extensive period of time of repeated soft droplets, will even the hardest of boulders develop a slight indentation and then eventually even a hole.
Jisa dadi garusungorasene anajuge samlo sedi chike anajuge garishigosene de pejirosina chajil oda chikna chashuda shusan dai goya mesande chik nyama chai sai se lo chai che shusan dang shuai singuye sambe samlo shorwa dashi 고야가 말했습니다. 근데 냠내 지금 삼담에 곰리에나 차지 어디든가 곰바 있은 되는 마치 지간 저 샤샤지 무디 문마도 같이 용거로 봐 무디 제 마도 같이 제가 무디 제 마도나 내가 저 이야기 줘두고 말아 제가 무디는 제 오래스 무디 제반에 이야기 줘 그래 너나디스 거라 가서 무디 제 전주의 제 무디 제 오래스 제가 무디 제반에 이야기 줘 그래 사지.
What we are being encouraged to do here is to guard ourselves from the propensity, from the way of thinking that says, oh, I've already read this text, or I've already heard a teaching on this topic, or I've already meditated on this topic. This is a gravely mistaken approach to take. This constant searching for something new, this almost looking for entertainment, this prevents us transforming our mind. Because the way to transform the mind is repeated efforts over a sustained period, meditating on the same topic again and again and again, keeping this topic in mind, not just in formal meditation, but informally, whilst going about one's activities. This is how one habituates oneself to the Dharma, how the Dharma becomes one's very way of thinking.
Bendigo 저게 대티로와 지게 추가란 마 티버직 사바는 대 티버 춘주지만 사겨 말왔단 대 티버지데 가야 말선 샤샤베나 나도 디월야 지게 춘뇌지 샤샤베나 마소이 티버직만 사겨 말에 안도 샤샤베나 도 안고 무디만 사용도 공다스디 디 춘뇌데 차상 다다 강용아 차거와 마지 되지 당보 티버 춘주지만 사겨 말와 근데 지 티버 춘주래 티버 춘주디 자다 가고 판도요 말와 이네디 무디질래요 직래 니래 숨라도 무디래는 간삼질이야 춘뇌데 다다 차용도 어디가 저게 배로시마선 세우시고 통해도 어디 추직 춘주 사와나 신 무디제 사와는 다다지 강뇌 다다 강 투고 쭉 다다 강고로 안디나시 ngā zui nyamlin chea dia, tā tīng nyamlin tāngpo dia, tuyas ma tā māle wā na chik samdā, nī pina ngā zui, tā jamze rā samdā na, xiān simja, xiān liya digi chū na, xiān liya pēmbā sumba sambiki samdā ya da, xiān liya nūsi chigi me sambi samlo tsurimru samdā wā ina, tsara chigi samdā, nī samdā, shi samdā du chini dine, nimiri tsara nī sum dine, nimiri dine du chini, yāne yādo samdā, 네 가삼 지gle 삼노데 게디나 디짱짱 코디야 지리고다 샬레 녀바세 자오긴 지메 삼노데 게디나 레디가 마도 뉘취 강바 나시 삼노데 게디나 샬레 뉘스 지메 삼베 삼노데 디네 게디나 레디가 서로죠 제산 디니기 삼노데 네 디나신 잠제 등하서 가브리엘레 잠제하서 잠제기로 요레베스데 요레 이네 또 가브리엘레 잠제 제쇼 가브리엘레 콘라시 슈니기에 중국어와 아니 소소야 소소 또 가사딜이네 잠제지에다 소소 또 나마로네 양데 콘라이 물어봐 제산 디니기 잠제데 소소를 가다 막 차상을 삼다지도 잠제 당보데 깔레하고 여러바다 대 추딩나 충충나지로 대 직삼다 대 삼다 삼 야네 야도 삼다 대 강점 직려 셈르데 숙체셔의 추강바다 숙체주도 네 그디나 니미지 잠제 샹야 지게 잠제 삼자냐 삼코도마도 네베 삼부기네 먹어지 용고로 와다 디나신다 진짜 야네 야도 구베 녀라 야네 야도 세데 진짜 야네 야도 삼다 냠네 제번 캡으로 토그르고 이야기 두그리 세지 벤네 취티바 나시리 세베제 손야디 다제산 디송고로와
This example, illustration that Lama Tsongkhapa has given, I think, is really something very useful for us because we can so easily see the truth of it. Everyone knows that at home, you need to close the tap properly. No one probably has the attitude, oh, the tap's dripping, so what? Because you know, by the time the next morning comes, so much water will have been wasted. The equivalent of bucketfuls of water will have been wasted from a dripping tap. So everyone knows, you close the tap properly. Because by just small droplets, over time, this adds up to something. So take that as an illustration for how to transform our own mind. So to give a further example, when we hear teachings on love and compassion, inspiration will arise to develop such an outlook ourselves. But to be able to become a person who is sincerely loving and compassionate, a single meditation or the occasional meditation following the occasional teaching will not bring about transformation. The only way to develop a habituation is like that dripping tap, which is sustained continuously, that's how the approach we need to take to our spiritual practice. We need to keep hearing teachings on the same topics, even if it's the same words, because that is part of the process of habituation. Likewise, we need to spend some time every day reflecting, using reasons, not merely repeating a formula, but using reasons, establishing why. For example, love is important, compassion is important, and the contrary minds such as anger are only harmful. Using reasons. And slowly through doing this, in addition then, out of meditation, to keep recalling what one had meditated on, keep recalling the teachings that one has heard. Only by doing that then, will the hardness in our heart soften, and will the minds of love and compassion arise and eventually abide ever longer. One thing we all know too is that we do have the seeds for love and compassion. When meeting the right circumstances, observing something, hearing something, love does arise, compassion does arise. So we know we have the potential, but we also know our habituation is weak because when something else happens, that love and compassion that may have arisen is lost. So we can take confidence that this is possible for us. But the only way to do so is to take our wish to be, for example, a loving person, and to apply ourselves repeatedly over a sustained period in the way that we are guided to, which is to keep hearing teachings, whether we've heard the same ones before or not, and to reflect with reasons repeatedly over a sustained period and keep those in mind during our day. And to the extent we do so, we can be certain that just like a dripping tap will fill up many buckets or wear out the hardest of stones, so too will our attitude change, and change in a way that's lasting and sustained and sincere.
That Nisugi Julia, that Diringi Lobsang Dorje or Lapsel Masona, Samlo di, the Samlo Nalia, Nangazuge, Ranshin Niga Kanga because Samlo de Karakari Yungudu. Ranshin Niga Pembe, Samlo de Karakari or Esepik, that is Samlo de Pa Shimjuche. That the Ranshin Niga Nubi, Samlo de Pa, Shahako, the Dipa, Machuache, Gayata. Ranshin Niga Pembe, Samlo di, Chica Hagoje, Di, and Yane, Yado, says sometime Jangdor Chagris, Jangdor Charge. Jangdor Chana Yagi Juris, Chesa Yagi Joy, Ding as Ranshin Niga Pemba de Yungores, Chesa Ranshin Niga Pembe, Samlo de Jangore, Dijane, Azulia, say Chike, Simki, Diki Jugure, say Janga to Diki Juptadida, some Newton, Jangdor Shed, Sungore, Chesa. The Samlo said, Mas Nubacisho did it, that's Emlinalia, Nubacisho, Samlo Nashin Nubace, Yomarda.
What I hope you take away from our two classes today is that the need to recognize the validity of some of the things you've heard. For example, the statement that we all want happiness and to be freed of suffering, and that is the underlying motivation behind all that we do. So this is stated, but for it to have any real transformative impact, you need to see if this is the case or not. See this for yourself. Moreover, it was also stated that the way to achieve happiness is to cultivate particular minds that are in accordance, that will lead to lasting happiness, and eradicate the ways of thinking that lead to suffering. So this too, you need to investigate for yourself whether it really is the case. Then thirdly, you need to check out the method that was presented to bring about this, namely habituation. That through hearing and reflecting and meditating repeatedly over a sustained period on the same topics, one will strengthen habituation to wholesome ways of thinking and weaken our habituation to unwholesome ways of thinking. So this method then, this technique, you need to recognize for yourselves whether it really is true or not. Because in our world, there are many things that we consider as having power, but the truth is nothing more powerful in our world than each person's mind.
Bene samlodi pa shukin teje semla ya shukin teje mimangbo cha sangbo sangpi chola zho tugoji tugorwa bene nga ji be sha bene njaorum chi doji korong gi din jamba da zewe nyamle je jisan digi zewe nyamle je digi shu jan ya pa ji lobden je de mimangbo shu ji jamje nyamle je de semma sangbo je mi sangbo je de samlo sangbo da tui gi shukin teje mimangbo shu le pando tugorwa da nga zo ge be sen ro xie bena denige and some you jumlendi, Korongi, Samba Samboti, Lord Donga Mambo Troine, the new Koronga, Samba Samboti, Shukingi, Mazu Mimapoli, Samba Sambochea, Nyamlenchedi, Shukin, Tetu, some of the bear, New Chimbore, Sambichole. There's some ambition, some Dabene, Jelia, Tewache, Nube, some of bear Dukzu Jendigi, Denigi Michigi, Mimambolia, and you get Denechores, Lobden, Mimambolia, some of the Duksujana. Jigmi Chawache, Jeneke, some Mongo Shukin Tetudoa, Denigi, some no knowledge, Shukin Tetugore. Jesa, some no knowledge, the new Shukin Teodu, some no digi Shukin Utone, Koyula, New Shuli to Gorvada. Jesa Koyulu Shuki, Koyuli should ne. Digi in the Beijing, and then Ansulia, a jig, near as among what the king and Mambote Gangate, Bendigo samling shukin hone koryuglu ne jisola ne di genyi nganzulya ane gangama mo cheaching gorwa. Jesa samlo sangbo ji shukin digi ane mi chasangle samlo sangbo samlo koryada. Samlo sangbo koryodu digi samlo sangbo di shukin gi koryug sunggyop cheada, koryule pheada, shen ganga setup cheada, mi shenda jile pendo gyachimo chuto yungdo. Jesa dine za samlo di 배 슈체모 뉴버체모 슈레 디네 장한주기 삼류토네 디기 풍수 소보 주투야다 강아 차산 세투야기 삼로 땅탕 다상유 점내디 기 송바 나신 지가도 냠는 제지 줘봐이나 다 디기 풍수 소보 주투야 강아 차산 세투야디 예리예리 당한 삼류되네.
The reason why it's correct to say that there's nothing more powerful in the world than one's mind is because it is through our way of thinking that one engages in wholesome or unwholesome activities. So if one's way of thinking is wholesome, one engages in wholesome activities. Moreover, those that one has influence over, one will influence them in wholesome ways. So for example, we can take a great being such as His Holiness, and that for decades now, he has guided thousands of people in ways that are leading to happiness. For those people directly, as well as through them, for those in their influence, in their environment. And so too, if we think of the Buddha, for millennia, the Buddha, through his teachings, has been having a positive impact on so many tens of thousands, millions of beings. So here we can see the power of the mind when it's wholesome, when it's virtuous, the impact that it has on the individual themselves and on others. It's also the case, though, when the mind is non-virtuous or unwholesome, that person themselves is deeply unhappy. Moreover, the impact they have on others is negative. This is because it's attitudes or values, these are ways of thinking that lead to benefit or harm. So when attitudes or values are beneficial, one acts in a way that is beneficial for oneself as well as others. But when one's values or attitudes are unwholesome or non-virtuous, it leads to harm. So here we can observe this in our world, in our own lived lives. We can see it, for example, in the destruction of our natural environment. The destruction of our environment has not come from wholesome ways of thinking. Wholesome ways of thinking lead to our environment being protected, as well as all the beings within that environment being protected. Unwholesome ways of thinking are self-centered, self-absorbed, wanting benefit for oneself, even if it comes at the expense of others. So I encourage you to think on this, because it's through this one will come to recognize the power of your own mind, come to recognize the importance of your own mental attitudes and values, because it's these that direct you. It's these, through these, you have impact on others.
즉 상계 순주 김전대 바 제바제 삼다 김전 삼다 두치네 삼다네 내수대 하고 그래 디자 수수냠네 제디 두시고래서 송거제자데 상계 상계 좀네디게 최디 김전 삼다 제바제 아니 지금 제바제제 남예 체시 두치는 냠네 제화 차고래 맞아 대바 삼제 겹수치에서 디점이 먼저 이야기 좋고 말해 송거래.
We'll conclude there for today. So tomorrow we'll look at how to develop faith in the teachings of the Buddha. So this is something of great importance. So this word faith, we should, because it has cultural connotations, we should understand it to mean trust. And for us to have sincere trust in the teachings of the Buddha requires us to use our intelligence, to think for ourselves. So with the basis of gathering knowledge, such as through teachings, and then using our intelligence to analyze, investigate, think for ourselves, we will come to recognize the validity of the teachings of the Buddha. And in this way, we'll have trust in the teachings of the Buddha. And that is indispensable to bring about the determination, the sustained determination to cultivate the teachings within. And thank you very much. If there are questions, then we'll have time for that tomorrow. Thank you.